This is the story of my father, who went through an Illuminati nightmare in order to save countless lives and fortunes, and the personal price that he paid for humanity. On January 7, 1942, my father was born and became the eldest of 5 children. My grandpa's salesman profession was able to provide a comfortable upper-middle-class lifestyle for my father to grow up in, financially speaking. My grandpa was a very smooth salesman and could sell literally anything. To outsiders, he looked like he was the nicest guy in the world. However, his personality at home was very different. He abused his wife, my dad's mother, often, and broke her nose several times. My grandfather was a Luciferian and a member of a secret society. My dad was born and raised in the occult. My father was hypnotized as a toddler in order to learn about his past life possibilities and spiritual gifts. They learned that he was an advanced soul with incredible intelligence and capabilities who could pick up things very quickly. They identified his mechanical and mathematical gifts, attention to detail, love for locomotives, and gift of prophecy. From kindergarten to age 18, my dad attended a Jesuit training Catholic academy where he learned about the New World Order and the alien agenda and Lucifer's global plans for world domination. He was schooled in his proposed role in it. He was also taught how to do past life chartings. After high school Jesuit training, my father went into the U.S. Navy. There he was enrolled in the MK Ultra and Monarch torture programs. He was selected, programmed, and trained as a chosen one to fulfill his role in Lucifer's agenda. He endured many tortures, including electroshock, in order to create amnesic barriers in his mind. My grandfather had a close relationship with spirits and could summon principalities. During a ritual, my grandfather asked the spirits what he needed to do to get additional wealth and power. They told him that they required loved one's blood sacrifice. My grandfather obliged and made the pact and agreed to the blood sacrifice through 2 supernatural murders. My grandma was driving my dad's 5-year-old sister to kindergarten one morning when a locomotive hit both of them on the tracks, dragging them over 160 feet to their deaths. My unavailable grandfather told my 19-year-old father, who was home on leave at the time, to collect their belongings out of the mutilated car. My father never forgot the bloody parts of their bodies that he saw inside the car. As is Illuminati protocol, the story ran for quite a while in all the major newspapers, the National Enquirer, and on television. The sacrifice was sold to the general population as a very unusual accident. My grandfather then profited many millions of dollars in insurance monies and railroad payouts. My grandpa spoke to my dad often about how he profited off of his supernatural murders. After the accident, my grandfather enjoyed the rest of his life with pricey liquor, women, song, world travels, a lakefront property, vacation homes, his new advanced secret society spot, and expensive occult ceremonies and rituals. He also married my grandma's younger sister. She never minded his lifestyle as long as she got her share. During my dad's last year in the U.S. Navy, he met my mother. She was from an immigrant Swedish bloodline and was also involved in the occult. Just before my father married my mother, he had a supernatural experience with Jesus, who asked him to leave the occult to serve him. After marrying my mother, he promised Jesus that he would serve him and would always be righteous with his walk. My mama promised my dad that she would also leave the occult so that he would marry her, but as far as I know, she never did. During the late 1970s, the Illuminati began consolidating local railroads under the broad umbrella of Illumina by buying up the local railways and their tracks. This independent railroad's land and track happened to be in a very desirable location in the expanding Chicagoland suburbs. At that time, they did not wish to sell their railroad. My father hauled nuclear waste out of the recently shut down Kerr-McGee waste dump in West Chicago, Illinois, which was located 3 blocks away from the West Chicago High School. After almost a decade on the job, the Illuminati chose my father as a patsy for their planned railroad bankrupting scheme and humanity poisoning event. He was ordered to disobey railroad rules and cause a multi-mile-long nuclear waste spill. He was promised little or no prison time and a substantial amount of money in exchange for carrying out their plans. After every time my dad disobeyed their illegal rules, these rich men in suits would call him into a secret meeting to ask him why he was not carrying out their plans. When they realized they couldn't get my dad to cause the accident, they then sent people to poison his food and drinks with nuclear waste. Over the course of a year, He lost his hair, developed big tumors in his glands, became extremely ill, and lost so much weight he looked like a skeleton. His legs also turned very yellow as he became jaundiced. Doctors could do nothing for him, so he turned to natural cures. He used many herbs, but especially raw garlic, alfalfa juice, and cod liver oil. He drank them down with raw milk. Miraculously, he gained his health. He became much more careful when drinking and eating at work, and maintained his body's defenses through raw garlic. These rich men in suits then sent people to mess with my dad's car while it was parked in the railroad yard. These expensive repairs often took days to diagnose and fix. After a few episodes of this, my father asked my mother to drive him to and home from work for a couple of months. When he thought it blew over, my father then began driving himself to work again. During the late night hours of winter 1979, my dad was driving home from work in a snowstorm. He became worried when he noticed that an 18-wheeler truck had been tailing him the entire way home from the rail yard. When he tried to speed up, he hit a slick patch of road, and his car spun out and crashed into the median. When he was a little over 50 feet away, the truck hit my dad's car. His car exploded and burned. My dad quickly hitched a ride home from a compassionate third party who saw the entire event. When we went back to see the wreckage and small parts everywhere, the truck was nowhere to be found. My father put in a police report, but ironically the truck was never seen or heard from again. After this happened, my dad called into a large Chicagoland talk show. This talk show also played excerpts from the Paul Harvey Show. He exposed the railroad bankrupting scheme and also talked about how he felt he was being targeted. The radio show's host and listeners weren't interested in the story, so he was invited back on to share the rest of the details of the story. My father knew Morse code from the U.S. Navy and sometimes listened to shortwave radio. In the fall of 1981, a fishing vessel was out in Lake Michigan. They were bringing in their catch that night when a freak storm swept in and began to sink their vessel. They lost all communications except for Morse code. They coded out their coordinates on Lake Michigan, the weather conditions on the lake, the details regarding their vessel, and the number of men on board. They also coded out several SOS signals. My dad decoded the transmission. He phoned the Chicago Police Department, gave them the information, and asked them to send out a search and rescue squad. As the fishing vessel continued to send SOS signals, the police seemed more interested in my dad's personal life and what he did for a living. As if he didn't already know, the police also informed him about the surprise storm that was hitting the Chicagoland area. When finally he heard no more messages from the fishing vessel, he then sadly told the police not to mind anymore, as it was now too late and the crew is now lost. My dad was so upset about this incident that he left for a couple of days to regroup and to be alone. When he came home again, he had a newspaper rolled up under his arm with the story of the downed fishing vessel inside of it. He then called into a radio talk show to discuss what had happened and how he tried to save the lives of the fishermen. The superiors of the Chicago Police Department then ordered the officers to stop and search him. In addition to stops and searches, the police department also brought my dad into the station for questioning in an attempt to waste his time and try to scare him. After a couple of times of being late for work because of it, he then began to go in early to budget time for traffic stops. Once inside the station, he shared many stories of military and railroad corruption with the Chicago police. My dad's stories also included the genocidal plans of the New World Order, much of which was secret at that time. As more and more secrets got out, it was quickly agreed upon by all parties that all police stops should be ended before my dad completely spills the beans about everything. In 1980, we moved to a farmette outside of Seneca, Illinois, which is south and west of Chicago, to have more space, try to have a peaceful life, and to grow our own organic food. Motions were then set in place to bankrupt my dad. The railroad cut his routes and gave him the minimum amount work possible per month. When he asked for more routes, his superiors told him that business had been declining because the economy was slow. Then one evening, he found a secret company log of the other engineers' routes and hours. He learned that he had the fewest routes of any of the engineers, even though he should be getting the most work, as he was one of the highest tenured engineers with an outstanding record. In 1982, the savings and loan crisis was in full swing, which bankrupted many farmers. Farmers were desperate for loans, and the mafia-owned Alfanos in Seneca and Oregon, Illinois, were happy to oblige. When the farmers couldn't pay back their loans, their children disappeared. Because we were going through tough times financially, 2 neighbor farmers and tradesmen were then sent to my dad. They offered him a deal which initially they thought he couldn't refuse in exchange for me and my younger brother. When my dad asked where the money would be coming from, the men pointed to the guys who ran the Seneca Alfano's Pizzeria and Bar. My dad then went into the bar to listen to his parents' stories about their bad loans and to see pictures of their missing children. He then went to Rush Street in downtown Chicago at night and saw their missing children out on the streets being pimped out. After collecting all the evidence, he then went back into Alfano's to confront the mafia management. He made a big scene as he demanded answers. When he told the police about the pedophile ring, he was then arrested, put in jail, and then put into a mental home for almost a month. When he came back home, he contacted my CIA uncle. My uncle was not sure how to handle the situation because he was also involved in the CIA shadow government's criminal activities. Since there was nowhere to turn, my dad called into his favorite talk show to spur a discussion about pizzas, illegal drugs, and trafficked children in the Illinois rural areas in an effort to ask anyone in Radioland if they knew what the connection was. My dad's call-in discussion then prompted investigation, which led to the discovery of the Seneca and Oregon, Illinois Pizza Connection criminal operation. Cars then began driving all the way up our farmhouse driveway and backing out as fast as they drove in. My dad then hid metal rakes halfway up across the driveway in order not to damage anyone's car who simply needed to turn around. These people then shortly found themselves stranded on the hot country highway at night with popped tires and a disabled car. Since they had no car phones, the walk to the nearest farmhouse to make a phone call was sometimes over a mile. One evening at dusk, 2 men in black showed up who smelled like a burnt-out electrical socket. By the time my dad turned around, grabbed his shotgun, and went back to the door to confront them, both they and their car completely disappeared. Also, their car tires were never popped by the rakes. After they showed up the second time, my father and I both felt we were going crazy together, but then maybe that was the point. My dad then called into his talk show to discuss all this activity. Although he had received great respect in the past, things changed for the worse when he described the men in black. My dad was being targeted everywhere and felt he had no place left to turn other than the United States' enemy of the day, the Soviet Union. So he took all his vacation time, packed us up into 2 cars, and headed to Washington, D.C. Because we were in the Cold War at the time, the Soviet embassy was very difficult to get into for American citizens. However, due to my dad's desperate pleas for help, they obliged. The Soviets and my dad spent almost the entire working day working out the details of his story and assessing his skills, capabilities, and work experience. When we were all finally finished, 2 Soviet men took myself and my brother, who was 3 years younger than me, into a private room for a special treat. After being sworn to secrecy, the Soviets then showed us spy devices hidden in the wall and inside the floor for the American government and how they worked. This was the highlight of my whole trip. After almost a month in D.C., the Soviets called my dad back into the embassy to tell us in person that they refused our visa application, even though they realized our plight. Due to the Soviet Union's expected collapse, they expected immigrants to be especially targeted and killed, but had this not been the situation, they would have helped us. Because we had not budgeted for major car repairs, we had to ditch 1 car, repair the other, and drive home with 9 people in a 4-door sedan. The unexpected car bills left us with little money to go home with. On the way home, my dad had to pawn his precious prized 14-karat gold EJ&E pocket watch that he had gotten from his beloved railroad, which changed his life forever. When my dad began work again, gangs of thieves began hitting his container loads to Gary, Indiana, and stealing his loads of merchandise. When he would stop the locomotive, the gangs would surround him and beat him up. Then railroad management fired him for reasons that were shaky at best. My high school faculty then tried to pressure me into accusing my dad of child abuse. Since my mom hadn't yet spiritually renounced the occult, she was using manipulation and torture to beta sex kitten program me behind my dad's back. When they asked me about child abuse, I described her actions to them. They then told me that they were not interested in pressing charges against her. They then went to my high school age younger sister, who agreed to set him up for manipulated accusations of child abuse. We were then taken out of school and put into foster homes until my mom agreed to divorce him. This picture describes what I went through in my foster home. They then sent in the SWAT team to the farmhouse and arrested my dad. While in jail, other inmates beat him up several times, and the guards moved him to solitary confinement for his own protection. In typical Illuminati fashion, our story ran everywhere for almost a month. My high school peers bullied me for all that my father did, claiming he was a psycho who didn't know how to work and provide for me. Both boys and girls knocked books out of my hands, threw me up against the locker in the hallways, and spitballs at me. One girl lit my hair on fire on the bus to school, and another beat me up in the locker room once I got to school. A high school football player threw me up against a wall, pinned me there, and nearly almost raped me in an agricultural laboratory area. The teachers, counselors, and bus driver witnessed it firsthand very many times and never stopped it. They also ridiculed me behind my back. Ironically, however, my sister, who had cooperated with the faculty, never received such bullying. My classmates also called me a bird psycho because I loved to observe, study, and paint birds. They said that I should be locked up in prison and a mental institution for life like my dad for my passion for birds. Because no student or member of the faculty ever once stood up for me, for almost 2 decades I felt ashamed of my spiritual gifts and love for birds. For this reason, I never became an ornithologist. It took my dad over 1.5 years to fight the charges and to finally win his freedom from jail. It then took 2 more years for him to sue the EJ&E Railroad for unjust dismissal and to win a settlement in his railroad retirement pension. My dad lost everything he owned in the divorce settlement and got minimum visitation rights to his children. My mother received all of his assets, a nice portion of his railroad retirement, plus quite a chunk of change out of his settlement. In 1993, my younger sister, who made up those manipulated child abuse stories, married into another Illuminati bloodline and became an Illuminist. After my dad had won his freedom and pension, she was chosen for the task to get him locked up forever. Her Illuminist parents-in-law helped coach her on how to financially benefit off her father. She prepared herself in fulfilling her role by becoming a therapist. It took her over 1.5 decades to convince him that she loved him deeply, would always take care of him, would be by his side, and would have his best interest at heart. Since my dad is a religious man, she also convinced him that she loved, worshipped, and believed in the same God that he does. He finally gave in to her manipulations while he was in a very emotional state due to recovering memories from his traumatic occult upbringing and MK Ultra and Monarch programming. Those memories had not been previously available to him due to mental amnesic barriers caused by severe trauma. When he finally gave her guardianship rights, she immediately sold his home, his Cadillac, his second car, and all his other remaining assets out from under him and manipulated us into believing that she gave the money to some good cause. No one ever saw paperwork of whatever good cause she supposedly gave my dad's money to. Her mother-in-law is a real estate agent and also profited off the sale of his house. She committed him to a mental institution and put him on mind control drugs, where he still remains to this day. In 2012, after explaining to my dad how she manipulated him, she also cut off letters, visits, gifts and presents, and phone calls. Are our prisons and mental hospitals full of people like my dad? Is the world also full of people who never fulfilled their destinies because they were so severely bullied by their spiritual gifts when they were children? My dad's efforts bought his independent railroad over 1/4 century more time. On February 1st, 2009, the CN, or Canadian National, finally bought the railroad except for the Indiana line. That was reorganized and is now called the Gary Railway. In the end, no one was poisoned, and for my father's sake, I hope that his railroad and its assets sold for a fair price. For many years, my dad thought that he was the only one in the world who experienced the wrath of these rich men in suits. Before my sister cut off all communication with my dad, I brought him in a book about them, which he was thrilled to receive. I explained that this author also lost everything and spent over 8 years in prison for writing this book. Since no one else stood up and did the right thing towards humanity, my father thought that he should be the one. In the end, my dad's bravery and unwillingness to compromise saved countless lives and fortunes. To this date, my dad still enjoys alternative talk shows and doing our family's past life chartings. To this I smile and say, "Oh, what the heck, Dad, go ahead and have fun with it." Also, still to this day, to the absolute very best of my knowledge, I can swear that my dad has never called in again to another radio talk show. Thank you very much for watching my video. If you find it in your heart to do so, please say a special prayer for my dad. May God bless you all, and please feel free to leave your comments in the section below.